Hello everybody, I am here with the everything you could possibly want to know about speed guide for Temtem. I know that there's been a few people who have been waiting for this, and I want to thank Gnomedolf for recommending it. So this is a guide that I don't think is out there. You can get a lot of this information from the wiki, but there's not so much detailing like specific speed breakpoints, and I'm also going to have a section on custom speed breakpoints. So I want this whole video to be a really good resource for anyone wanting to know actual. It's more meant to be like general information on what speed breakpoints you should probably know, like everyone should know, and then also like if you're making a team, what should you consider? Like what speed breakpoints should you be like? Okay, maybe I should outspeed this. Maybe I want to do this, that, or the other. So I'm hoping this video is going to be a great general resource for use for a long time. But it is possible that things could change. The speed mechanics really don't change often, if almost ever. But there could be balance changes where some Tems would get speed increases or decreases that would change some specific breakpoints. But in general, I hope that the idea still gets across, even if this is looked at far in the future. But for reference, the current patch that I'm making this video on is 1.5.2. So that's just for reference. I am planning on having the video kind of split up into three different parts. One of them would be for general speed breakpoints. Just, the breakpoints that I think everyone should know, kind of like why I picked those breakpoints, and then maybe a few Tems that are commonly put at those breakpoints. But I'm not going to have like I'm not going to list every single Tem a breakpoint for all of them. I'm going to be, you can't do that. There's too much information that goes into like, oh, what should the speed of this Tem be at? And I'm hoping that's what the second section is kind of useful for, which is going to be how do I make a custom speed breakpoint for your team. Once again, it won't be perfect, but I'm hoping to give you kind of like a good guide and an idea of things to consider when making breakpoints for your team. And if anyone really wants like specific speeds for individual Temtem, I'm going to have to refer you to my in-depth competitive guides, where I go through a couple different builds and traits for Temtem and explain like I have the speeds in those as well as just full builds and info, and that's going to be the only way a much better way to offer information on individual breakpoints. So to just follow that series if you're interested in that. And then the third section of this video is I'm just going to have some miscellaneous speed info. I'm hoping some of it's going to be something that you may not know, but a lot of it's just kind of general information that you can probably look up on the wiki. But, maybe it'll be something that has kind of slipped your mind, or never know. Maybe you'll find something new there. So I should have timestamps in the pinned comment below, unless you're like Notification Squad and you get here before I can do that. So, yeah, we'll jump into it now. I'm going to start with some background notes. Just very simple, like what does the speed symbol mean for the different moves? So negative prio is really the biggest one of note, because this actually just got changed not long ago. Negative prio used to basically be 0 times speed, where it would always be the last move in a turn, unless there's multiple Tems hitting, multiple Tems using negative prio moves, but it doesn't matter too much there. Basically, it goes last. But now it's actually just 0.25 times speed, which is still incredibly slow and hardly ever is relevant. But ever since the Decidora change, it actually has a speed value. So you technically can outspeed something with a negative prio move. I wouldn't aim to do that though. Next we have low prio. So low prio is just half time speed. Normal prio is 1 time speed. High prio is 1.5 times speed. Very high prio is 1.75 times speed. And ultra prio goes before swaps. Just a fun little tip for any PvE players that don't know it yet. is Ultra Prio moves will actually go before items, which specifically is relevant for Tem cards. So if you are trying to catch something and maybe you have like a Hurry Warp move flank that wants to cage to inflict a status ailment, then you could cage before you throw a temp card, or cage and then throw a temp card, and they'll both happen in the same turn. Or they'll cage and then throw the card. So that's kind of fun there. And then I want to note speed creep. I want to get that mentioned first because that's a term I'm going to use a lot in this video, I believe, and I want you to have some knowledge ahead of time on what I mean when I'm saying it. So speed creep is just putting a few extra points in speed to outspeed opponents reaching the same breakpoint. So for reference, I'm just going to mention 232 here, which is the most common speed breakpoint in the game, which I'll touch on in more detail later. Like, let's say you have a Tem that you have at 232 speed. And well, speed creep would be like somebody's thinking, "Oh, I'm going to put 233 speed in my Tems to outspeed everyone else who's already going 232." But then somebody else could be like, "Oh, I'm going to do 234 because I'm going to outsmart the guys going 233 who are trying to pass 232, and I'll outspeed both of them." And it's just kind of like an endless cycle of you can always invest one more speed than your imaginary opponents, but you never know when or if it's viable, and when to stop even. But if I mention speed creep, it's basically just that, putting a couple extra points in a breakpoint to outspeed opponents that are potentially reaching the same spot. All right, now we'll get into kind of the general speed breakpoints, and like I'm gonna apologize that like the whole thing is kind of scuffed. Like, yeah, this is Google Docs, and I'm gonna be referencing the wiki and Temtem a lot. Both of them are really good resources, and I'm not a fancy. I don't have fancy editing software, and I'm not going to invest a whole bunch of hours to make this. But the information I will still be really solid. It's just going to look a bit scuffed, so bear with me, and I hope it's still useful. So the first breakpoint is 128, which is base speed Yowler. And technically, it's base speed 40, but it's really relevant for Yowler. So like, why Yowler? Well, 128 is like it's a lot of. There's not even a lot of Tems that are slower than that normally. If we just find, it's already sorted by low speed. You find Yowler and he's like right here. So there's like what 20 some Tems, and most of them are pre-evolutions that are slower. So it's not a super relevant breakpoint. But if you're running a Tem that is slower than Yowler and you're considering putting an amount in speed in it, you could definitely consider at least outspeeding Yowler. So why would you want to outspeed Yowler? The main reason is Yowler's a very common raid boss in stall teams, and being able to outspeed it and deal damage before it gets off a toughen, or more importantly a hibernate, can win or lose you a game. Or I mean, like it was Saku's case, being able to narco hit before clinch could be the difference between life and death of those two Tems. So, like I said, there's really not a whole lot of Tems you're gonna want to put speed invest in, but maybe Calibus. Maybe you want to like have a humiliating slap on your Calibus, so you'll put some amount of speed in it. Well, just put enough to outspeed Yowler. Or maybe you want your Gyarados to have a bit more speed so that it doesn't get frond whipped by a faster Chimerian and just outspeed Yowler. It's just an idea. All of these breakpoints are very general. It's just like something you could hit and something I could maybe recommend hitting, or they're super common, just things to keep in mind. Like, can I outspeed this? Like, if you have a Tem, like a slower, maybe you have like a Scaravolt. Well, base speed Scaravolt is base speed 44. It outspeeds Yowler. But if you're in game, you don't get to see that. You see that your Scaravolt has like, I think 131 speed, 134 speed. You're like, does that outspeed Yowler? Well, Yowler's 128 speed. So it's like you don't have to memorize every breakpoint, but Yowler's just one of the slightly more relevant ones among the very slow Tems in the game. Now I got on to the next point, which is a lot more easier to cover, is just 155, which is where you reach 232 speed with high prio. And this one's relevant because 232, as I mentioned, is like the most common speed breakpoint in the game. I have both 221 and 232 kind of like highlighted because they're definitely two of the most, if not the most relevant breakpoints in the game. But 232 is definitely more important than 221. So it's like you could have whatever the breakpoint would be just a couple points slower than this. That would outspeed 221 with high prio, and that would be just fine. But you're gonna find that most people go for 232 than 221. And I mean, so good breakpoints or good Tems to hit this breakpoint would be specifically Garunder and Molgu, because both of them are slow Tems that have prio in their kits. So being able to get a little bit more value off of their prio can be super useful. And you still don't have to sacrifice all that many points in like bulk or damage to have that speed. Plus you'll be able to speed creeps some other stuff. Like something else relevant about these breakpoints is, let's say you are hitting 155 speed on your grinder. Well, Grinder's base 49, Molgu's base 51. I think Molgu hits like 149. Okay, I don't have all the numbers memorized, it's just general. But so Molgu's only 156 speed. So if you hit 155 on your Garunder, you'll outspeed Molgu. So, and you can do super effective damage to that. So it could be very relevant in matches if your opponent's Molgu doesn't have the same breakpoint. So you can not only reach the breakpoint for this purpose, but also for that specific matchup as well. So speed's important, but you got to find the right balance. So next breakpoint is 162, which is base speed 60. So it's just a general. This is more of one just to keep in mind rather than one to set your Thames speeds to. So there's a lot of Thames that are base speed 60. I mean, some of them are pre-evos, but I mean, you got Tatters, Enrath, Adoro, Turok, Moala, Venmet, Volgon, Volfi. I think I miss Volfi. That's a lot of Thames. And most of them do invest some amount of speed, but I think Adoro is one of the main ones that doesn't. Some slower Tatters don't. Bulky Volgons usually don't. Moalas sometimes don't. Even not all I mean, it's just... It's still a relatively good breakpoint to hit because there's so many Thames at this random speed. It's probably like the median speed or something. So it's a great one to keep in mind. And if you're just a couple points lower, you could just, put a few points in, get there. I know whenever I play Piranhient, I always hit at least 160 or 162 speed just to reach that breakpoint. Maybe you get like a Cold Geyser freeze on Thames there. Or like Ragnet to Hypno something. The same idea. And then, I mean, even the base, outside of base 60, there's still a lot of Thames all the way up to base speed 66. There's just like 30, 40 Thames in the base speed 60. Okay, maybe that's an exaggeration, but there's still a lot of Thames, okay? And base speed 66 is 172. I don't have that breakpoint on here, but I do have the max speed of those Thames on here, which primarily is max Nesla and Chromion. And in the same idea, that's the next breakpoint, is trying to outspeed them. So 182 is to outspeed max speed Nesla or Chromion 2 prio with 3 prio. So once again, not always relevant, but if you're trying to outspeed a Nesla Thunderstrike, and you have a priority option, so maybe like a slower Tukai. If you were running a bulky Tukai, you'd probably want to hit 182 speed on it, so you can get a tornado off on maybe the ally of the Nesla before it dies. Just kind of a thought. Not that you'd really want to run slow Tukai, but just in case you did. It's just a general good prio breakpoint for slower Thames. Next is 186, which is just a couple points more. I wanted to separate these two just because I end up going to 182 speed far more than I would have imagined. So I figured it was relevant enough to mention. But you could also just round up to 186. But the main reason you would do that is if you have a way to boost your speed. Because this breakpoint is specifically to reach 232 speed with +1 speed. So there's two main Thames that I'd think hit this, and that's one being Unnoticed Mouflank, because Unnoticed raises speed by 1 stage, and Mouflank really appreciates all the extra bulk invests it gets by not having to invest in that speed. And the other one would be Arachnite next to Gazuma to gain fast charge. Arachnite's not super fast as is, but if you're running a faster glass cannon Arachnite, being able to hit this breakpoint and get the speed boost would be valuable. And I mean, like I didn't mention it, but like stat boosts, it's just 0.25 for each stage. So plus 1 speed would be 1.25 times speed, plus 2 speed would be 1.5 times speed, and so on. Next speed breakpoint. I call this the Crystal Spiker breakpoint. It's to outspeed max speed, Golzy, or Platimus is 2 prio with 3 prio. So why is it the Crystal Spiker breakpoint? Max speed Golzy is weak to crystal moves, but it also has Oshidashi. So if you have something like, say, Zenareth, which we just saw at the base 60s. So Zenareth loves clicking crystal spikes and can KO most Golzys with crystal spikes. However, Golzy can also darn near one-shot most Zenareths with Oshidashi. But crystal spikes has prio, and Oshidashi is 2 prio. So if you have a Zenareth at 200 speed, you'll always outspeed Golzys, and with your crystal spikes before you get hit with an Oshidashi, which is super valuable. It's also like, if there's not a whole lot of prio earths anymore, this is what was a great breakpoint for Sludge Gift Volphy. But now it's also good for offensive Cowrans with Sludge Gift, and also even like offensive Grumpers with Sludge Gift. For the same reason with Golzy, you could also have stuff with lots of Turbine users, or just any amount of prio to outspeed Platimus to avoid the evasion from Toxin Shower. Turbine on stuff like a Tuvine or the Tornado from... I'm just scrolling out. Tuvine or like Tukai using their prio wind moves to KO Platimus before getting hit with Toxin Shower and getting avoided is valuable too. Next speed breakpoint is 221. This is one of the highlighted special ones. So this is to outspeed max speed Oshiara, Gialis, and Ukama 2 prio with 3 prio. I mean, that's the specific of it, but really it's to outspeed everything that's not Amphitheater. Outspeed their 2 prio with your high prio. Or North. I'm referring to these as 2 prio, normal prio, everything. Sorry, it's just like they're 1 times with your 1.5 times. Normal prio, high prio, 2 prio, 3 prio. If I refer to them as anything of those, that's what I mean. So yeah, so it's just everything other than Amphitheater. So it's not like super hard to forget that. Just know that Amphitheater is slightly faster than them. But if you have a Tem with prio at 221, you'll outspeed everything that's not using its own prio and not Amphitheater with your high prio. So it makes it a very relevant breakpoint. It's usually commonly used with... I would say you don't want to have a Tolkien that's slower than this. That's one of the main ones, because Ukama and Oshiara are both fast water types that can outspeed you and kill you before your Tolkien would be able to use a Fiery Soul. It's also nice for Volphy, because Volphy can attack the Oshiara and Ukama before they get their turn 1, turn 2 water moves off. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in general. It's just kind of... It's a very good general breakpoint for Tems that have slower base speeds but invest a lot of speed. That's kind of why I mentioned Tolkien and Volphy, because Tolkien's only base 65 speed, which isn't very fast. It's just a lot of people invest speed in it. And Volphy's even slower at base 60 speed. So 221 is nice to still accomplish something with your speed values and not have to invest fully in speed. And next is, I mean, I could have made this gold and just call it like the golden breakpoint, but I didn't. That's brown. I figured it's like shiny. It's like a diamond. We'll call it the Luma breakpoint. 232 is the same as 221, except you're outspeeding Amphitheater as well. So you will outspeed all 2 prio, all normal prio moves with high prio. And that's super important and just something that every competitive player should know. So I mean, and that's not including like other specific speed boosting options like Plethoric, Whiplump, and Ukama for that matter. can both outspeed with 2 prio still even past the 232 breakpoint. So you'd have to pay attention to any amount of speed boosts. Same as like fast charges. Some of them can get past this breakpoint. But in general, this is something that you can just know, and like if you're afraid of a Servatios from an Oshiara, but you have Prio with a 232, you're good. You can kill it. If you're afraid of a Fire Tornado from a Drakash, but you have high Prio, you're just like, well, I don't have to worry about it. So there's a lot of strong nuking moves that are normal Prio. That as long as you have high Prio, you can threaten them first, and that's kind of why this breakpoint is so important. But it's also worth noting that this breakpoint it's really only worth hitting if you have high prio moves. If you're running a tem like let's see if I can find one around a middle speed tier. I didn't have every example listed initially. Oh, the Scunch is a good one. So if you have a tem like Scunch, where it's relatively fast, and you could definitely go up to 232 speed. But Scunch doesn't have any high prio moves. It has Ninja Jutsu, which is very high prio, which is even faster than this. And its two main damaging options are 2 prio. So it's just like, well, there's no real reason to hit 232 except to threaten out all the other 232 users. But then if you're playing a tem without prio, at a prio based speed tier, you're still probably going to get out traded because your opponents will just use their prio on you, and they'll kind of win that way. But you can still threaten them. Like not every time that hits this breakpoint has like always has access to prio. Like a tem like Tukai may hit 232. Tukai doesn't have any zero hold prio. Its priority move is typically tornado. So if you want to, you can punish it turn one and after it's used tornado as well. With you, with at the speed breakpoint, even if you don't have prio. Well, obviously you'd have to speed creep, but you know, that's kind of the. I spent a little bit more time on that one. I hope I got the point across. It's a very important breakpoint, and yet it's not the end all be all. I just hope I explained it well enough. Then there's kind of a large gap in speeds. I mean, there are breakpoints in between 232 and 265, but most of them it would be max speed of really slow Thames. Like 260 is base speed monk or max speed Munko. That's about the only one you could potentially consider relevant because most of these slow Thames don't invest up to max speed. Wolfie can potentially. Wolfie's 262. At that point, probably just hit 265. But most of the time, you're not going to see any of these Thames running max speed. Gallios might, but it doesn't all that often anymore. Because Jinx Whisper, Adrenaline Shot, the bug got fixed. And it lost Transient Echo. So, yeah, there's almost no break. I mean, I guess max speed Ragnit's kind of popular sometimes, but Ragnit loves bulk so much. I can't advise you to reach a really weird breakpoint between these. Just generally, like obviously there's specific matchups where you'd want to, but in a general sense, I can't advise reaching any breakpoint between 232 and 265. Just do one or the other, unless you're speed creeping to 232 a whole bunch. So what 265 is though is that you can outspeed max speed Oshara Gyalis Ukama once again the everything other than Amphitheater with +1 speed. But this also works the reverse, where if you hit a Oshara Ukama or Gyalis with a -1 speed, you will also outspeed them. That's something I forgot to mention up here. Oops. This it's the same for here. But if you say like Tesla Prison's a very common move right now. So let's say you use Tesla Prison on Oshiara. Well, then if you're at least at 265 speed, well, you can outspeed the Oshiara next turn. Super valuable. It's a very good breakpoint for Gazma right now because of that specific reason. You just Tesla Prison and Oshiara, and then it doesn't kill. Oshiara has enough bulk to live one Tesla Prison. So you finish it off with a second one after its -1 speed. Next, but it's just that you only want to do this breakpoint if you have some sort of speed control, though. If you don't have any ways to raise your speed or lower your speed, it's not super relevant. In which case, I'd recommend the next breakpoint, which is 272. So this is kind of the breakpoint. 273 if you want to outspeed, but 272 is the actual value of these Max Nestle and Chromion. This is the breakpoint that you want to look at for just any faster tem that you don't want to invest max speed into. I know I commonly hit this breakpoint on something like Nagais. This is what I ran on my Platamus. This is probably what I'd run for Golzies. A Hazrat, if a faster Hazrat, if that's what I would run. Not necessarily that you have to, because these are Nestle and Chromion are two of the more common Tems at that breakpoint to hit it, but it's just all base speed 66. I ran 2-wire at that speed breakpoint before. You might see a faster Koish there. And being able to outspeed all of those Tems can be valuable. Problem is this is also one of the more heavily creeped breakpoints because there's a whole bunch of stuff just ahead of it that are also relevant breakpoints, like max speed mix, Raiken after 2 prideful boosts, Osakai after a turbo, and stuff like that. That's just like, maybe it's a little bit more speed. Max speed Acronox and move flank even. So it's just, I always play it a bit safer and prefer to have more bulk. So just I'd choose a lower speed tier than some of those other ones, and I don't creep too much. But it's a very relevant breakpoint, especially until Digi-Aggro gets kind of nerfed a bit more. And Chromion's around less. Not that even Chromion's on much Digi-Aggro team. Sorry, I'm ranting on. All right, next. Next, I have kind of a range. There's quite a few just breakpoints in this small range. I wanted to touch on all of them, but if you want to be safe, you could just go up to like 305 to outspeed all of them if you have a tem that reaches that. There's so many tems in it that are in between this breakpoint that invest full speed or have potential to. So 296, I just say lots of fast threats. This is the breakpoint for Inky, Shaolant, Owlhe, and Barnshee. And all of them can very easily run max speed and get away with it and have success. So if you have something that can outspeed them, you probably want to. In general. 299 is max speed Golzi and Platamus. So that's just kind of going back to this breakpoint here. So if you hit 300 speed, you can outspeed them. That's why with 3 prio you can outspeed them at that breakpoint. 302 is max Hedgen. Very relevant. Hedgen's such a pain to deal with since it always has prio. So even though it is 302, more relevant is that you need something above 302 with prio, which is typically going to be Saipat. So that makes Saipat also a relevant breakpoint, which maxes out at 304. There's not a whole lot of Tems that are faster than Saipat, and especially the ones that actually run max speed. If we look at Saipat here, it's tied with Pocus, Size Munch. Momo is built bulkier. Valash is hard to justify at max speed if you're not Funky How. Kapire loses to it anyways. Mudrid loses, but can technically Crystal Deluge. And then it's just kind of the 4 fastest in the game. So you get to this point, and it's just kind of like, you probably can't outspeed it. But maybe you can look into it after getting some sort of speed control. Maybe you want to look at max Saipat after it takes a Tesla Prison, or after you get a Turbo Choreography. And then you'd want to still know the value of 304. Be like, can I outspeed it? So that's why I put it on here. But like I said, it's just kind of like a range of stuff to know. And then last is just kind of like the breakpoints. So 330 is max Oshiara Gale Sukama. That's why 221 with 1.5 outspeeds it. And then max Amphitheater is 347. Once again, why 232 outspeeds it. So that's going to be it for the general speed breakpoints. Now I'm going to do as good of a description as I possibly can on custom speed breakpoints. So I kind of did a little bit of that as I was going through the general breakpoints, but when you're creating a speed breakpoint, there's so many things to keep in mind. Just pick a few Tems here. So I know Grumper's one that I maybe a few different speed tiers. So we'll start with Gario as in a low speed tier. Go into Grumper. I should have had this set up ahead of time. My bad. Kind of a middling speed tier. Higher speed tier. Alright, I think this will be good enough. So speeds are tough. It depends a lot on your team. So trying to give a general idea of what speeds you should run is tough. Because it's like if you're running a faster team, or even more of a mid-range team, like maybe your whole team floats around 162. That's not even that fast, but it's just like it's maybe your whole team is within that 60 to 66 base speed range, but you have a Gario on there. The question kind of is, do you want to reach 162 speed on your Gario? Well, I would say you probably don't. You probably just want to. In that case, you probably wouldn't, because that's a lot of speed invest. It would be 200 speed invest to reach 162. And it's like, yeah, I mean, Gario can hit Turok super effective. That could be really valuable. Maybe you have like a turbo user and you want to attack Volphy before you get plagued. Base speed Volphy, important. Or Zenareth or something. It's hard to justify running around like 200 speed just to reach a breakpoint. I would say optimally, you cap out at 150 for a general team breakpoint, and or 150 TVs, I should say. So like, it's not set in stone, but I think it's a good spot to look at. But I mean, if I was looking at Gario, what I'd first want to do is probably go back to this. I'd go to the wiki and I'd sort by slowest Tems first, and I'd find Gario. I'd be like, all right, what are some things that are just faster than Gario that I might want to outspeed? I'd see Magmut. Okay, Magmut's base speed 40, which is the same as the relevant Yowler breakpoint. So then I'd start by investing up to base speed Magmut, which we can see is 128. Okay, we'll go up to 128. It was 129 to outspeed that. All right, let's keep going. We scroll down a bit more, we see Scaravolt. Okay, Scaravolt I can 4x, so being able to attack it before it gets a hit off, especially since it's relevant with half full right now, we'll go up to max speed, or to base speed Scaravolt. The Scaravolt is 134, okay? So we'll go up to 134. Or 135, I guess. Alright, back to the list. Let's scroll down a bit. It's like Garunder. Garunder's fairly popular and run with low speed. However, Garunder also commonly hits a speed breakpoint. So it's like, you could choose to invest enough speed to outspeed base speed Garunders and pick on the people who don't reach like the 155 breakpoint. But if you wanted to reach all the way up to 155, you're like, oh no, then you're like, yeah, that's a bit more than I probably want to invest. So it's just like, well, maybe I'll just leave Garunder there. Is there anything else relevant to hit? Mulgu, Grumper, kind of in the same boat. They could end up hitting a higher breakpoints. So, but you don't always know that. If you want to be safe, you could invest all the way up to something like a base speed Mulgu, which is going to be the fastest of all your relevant counters. You don't need to outspeed Ragnet. You don't need to outspeed Tortonite. You don't need to outspeed Piranhans. So you want to maybe hit 147, which is still a lot of speed invest. And this is just if you want speed on your Gario, which you don't always want. Sometimes you just want the extra 112 TVs in bulk. And maybe just investing the 50 for the earlier breakpoint is a-okay. I would probably end up just opting for the 52. But if you wanted to outspeed Molgu, just for that higher chance of being able to knock it out before it does anything, the option is certainly there. And I'd say this is where you'd cap out on Gario. The other thing to keep in mind is what are some, with Gario specifically and the really slow speed tiers, is what kind of low prio do I need to outspeed? So with Gario, you're like, okay, I want to outspeed Frondwa from Chimerian. Can I do that at this breakpoint? Yeah, max speed Chimerian, offhand, I know is 202. Max speed even is 302. So they'd have to be practically max speed if they want to outspeed you at this breakpoint. However, if they were only to outspeed you at the other breakpoint we set, 135, they'd only have to hit 270. And, 272 is a relevant breakpoint from that I mentioned on the list. So and Chimerian being able to outspeed Nesla and one-shot it with a Crystal Plume Gatling could definitely be something that somebody considers. And you save a lot more TVs than just going max Chimerian. However, how often do you run into a fast Chimerian? There's so many things to keep in mind that it's tough. So you could calc this for Chimerian. You could also calc it for Molgu. You could just have 0 speed invest, or you could calc it for Scaravolt. And you kind of go through like what do I potentially want to outspeed, and then you try and consider to yourself, what are the odds I actually run into this? Because for every time that you put enough speed in to calc or to outspeed a Molgu, you'll survive on. You'll wish you had the extra like 70 TVs and HP. 70 TVs is like, I don't know, 20 health or something. Not quite. So, and that's kind of what I do with the slower Tem like Gario, and I mean kind of with all Tems in general. Grumper is kind of similar, but Grumper has a priority option. So you have a slow Tem with a prio option, being Sludge Gift. So it's like, okay, so I can look at my speed, but also look at my direct speed, but also look at my priority speed. So 145 would be 217 with prio, which doesn't reach 221, and it doesn't. And 145 isn't a breakpoint itself. So it's just like, okay, maybe I want to reach 155. That way I can reach 232s with 3 prio. And that's a good place to start. And it's reasonable. It's only 50 speed TVs. And so, maybe you try a few games like this and you're like, okay, it feels pretty good, but I'm still getting outsped. And I don't know if it's from speed creepers at 232 or if it's just not high enough value. Or maybe it's too much speed. Maybe you're like, oh, I wish I had the extra health. So if maybe you're running a stall team, a Grumper with instead of Sludge Gift, maybe you have Stonewall instead, and it's more like a Sparks support set. Even though Sparks has prio, you don't really need it to go first. Then you'd probably have 0 speed. But I know I ran a max speed Grumper for a little while, but that's kind of like an exception to the rule. But it's just what I determined on Grumper is that I wanted more speed because Grumper has a great offensive type and a bad defensive type. Okay, well, I would rather have more speed then and try and outspeed maybe up to Golzy, which is the 200 speed breakpoint, and then try and see how that feels. That way I can still certainly outspeed the 232 Tems with Sludge Gifts and also threaten Golzy. And also I outspeed all these other breakpoints as well as all the other Tems up to like the base speed, well, whatever base speed Golzy and Platymus are, anything that doesn't run speed there. So stuff like Mashuk, which is a relevant Tem, that I can very commonly outspeed. Stuff like Hazrats, I can outspeed with Sledge Gift Prio. So, but this is a lot of speed invest. Is it really worth it to invest this much speed over special attack or HP? So finding a balance of HP, speed, and special attack is tough. You have to think about what you really want the Tem to do. Is it okay for Grumper to die in 1 or 2 hits, but do a ton of damage and sort of like be fast enough to get it off? Or would you rather be fast and deal less damage, but being able to take hits and still outspeed means that you can still get that extra turn off that you want? With Grumper, there's also the factor to consider of slowdown, which is a control move. So the more speed you put in Grumper, the more value you get from slowdown. So that may be something extra to consider. You could also be like, well, if I really just want a Tem to be tanky, fast, and sleep, maybe it would be better to have Zenareth. So we'll just hop over to Zenareth now, which is once again slightly faster than Grumper. And I would say Zenareth specifically is you want to reach the Crystal Spiker breakpoint that I mentioned, which is 200. Always like that. With the Crystal Spiker, you probably want to start with this. Same thing with even Tortonite, which is the slowest Crystal Spiker. Probably not Arachnite. Arachnite's a special case because it's not a crystal. You'd want to hit a breakpoint like this to start, but then you have other issues so Zenareth is weak to fire, and Tolkien is a Tem that commonly hits 221 in its speed breakpoints. So maybe you want to reach 221 on your Zenareth also to outspeed potential Tolkiens. But then that ends up being like, oh yikes, that's an extra 110 TVs, and even more if you want to speed creep it. But it's okay because as long as I'm able to get a Crystal Deluge off, then I don't even get hit. So it's trade-offs like that. And then also it's just if you're running a Wrecked Farewell or a Stall Zenareth with maybe like Diamond Fort or Quartz Shield, then you may not want any speed at all. And then that's kind of like a lot of the general slow kind of options, but what about a faster option? I think Hazrat's a really good example because it can be run with like 0 speed, middling speed, and also high speed. And kind of depending on what role you want it to play. And a lot of these speed tiers, it depends on like the flexibility of a Tem, and once again, like the role you want it to play and what kind of team you're running. So I've seen a lot of bulky Hazrats, especially in the past with old Nutrition Bar that healed it a whole bunch, where Hazrats would run like 0 speed or next to 0 speed. Maybe they hit 200 because that's only 37 TVs for something this fast. And then you want just a whole bunch of bulk and damage. Well, I think a spread like this would be acceptable. Like, it's not the best in the game, but you can still threaten a lot of stuff by just tanking hits. And even though you're this fast, you don't have to spend it all on speed invest. If the rest of your team is floating around 200 speed, you may not want something that's at 300 speed and dies to 1 hit. You may want it to be able to take a hit or 2. At the same time, maybe you're like, okay, well, Hazrat has priority. Maybe it's a good idea to have it hit 232 speed. And like that's another good breakpoint. Hazrat has both Lava Wave and Venomous Claws for Prio. So you can get a lot of value by hitting this breakpoint. You'll be able to hit Oshiaras that threaten you with a Cerbatios. You'll be able to hit even Amphitheres with a Lava Wave and stuff. So it may be a worthwhile breakpoint. And maybe you try it and you're still getting outsped and you're not taking enough hits. Well, that's okay. You can just throw even more speed in it. But you have to be aware if you're going like full max speed on something like Hazrat. Hazrat only reaches 292 speed. So you'll get outsped by lots of fast threats. So stuff like Inky, Shellant outspeed. If you get like high-toed by a Shellant, that would feel really bad. Alhi and Barnshe can both hit you with wind moves faster. Drakash can hit you with Dust Vortex before you can get a Wastewater off on probably the ally. And you're also speed tying stuff like Lawali and Grandpa. Or no, Lawali's slower, but Grandpa. So maybe you're like, okay, 500 is too much. You go down to 272. Just so that you can outspeed Nestlas with a Wastewater or Venomous Claws. And then you save 100 TVs that you can put elsewhere. So it's just like, in general, even though I say this is like a section on custom speed breakpoints, I've just showed that I end up referencing this general list so often because I start here and I decide after kind of playing a couple games what I want to do afterwards. If I want to increase, decrease, invest elsewhere, and so on. So that's what I'd recommend doing. If anyone has, like I said, I'm gonna do specific guides in my in-depth competitive guides for specific speeds. If you're really just kind of like, I don't know what speed this should be, check, first of all, figure out what kind of moveset you're going to run on it. See how many prio options it has. Then reference this kind of general speed list. Maybe figure out, okay, can I get to one of these relevant breakpoints with like 150 or less invest? Maybe consider it. And then just be like, if you don't have 3 prio, maybe this breakpoint isn't relevant. But maybe you have speed control, so this one is relevant. And then after that, it's best to look at the list of Tems, maybe on the wiki, and just sort and see. Like, if we're, like I said, if we're looking at Hazrat, maybe you look just above it, Alfie Barnshe, Inky Ishalanch. It's like, maybe I want a little bit more bulk to try and survive those hits. So you're going to slow your Hazrat down. I said we'd hit the 260 or 272 breakpoint. Well, then we get outsped by an Osakai, potentially, or a Tornado from Whiplump, or a Tornado from Tukai. So it's just like, is that worth it? Do those times normally go max speed? A lot of it just requires knowledge and the potential. Like, if the chance of running, I'm a numbers guy, if the chance of running into a max speed Tukai is like, 30% of all Tukais that you see, which is already uncommon enough, then maybe you're just like, okay, I'm fine running 273. Maybe Tukai's at the same breakpoint as well. Who knows? I ran mine at 273. So I hope that's a good general guide. It's not perfect. I can't give perfect general answers for a game with so much flexibility and so many potential options. So that's about as good as I can probably do. And now, last, I just have some miscellaneous info on speeds. Last I checked, these are all true, but I mean, there's potential that they could be wrong. I didn't double check each individual one. I'd say this is the one I'm most unsure about, but I'll just kind of go through them, and hopefully there will be something interesting that you didn't know before. So, first thing is that speed changes are dynamic. Increasing attempt speed on a turn will give it the boost for the turn. So if you use something like Turbo on an ally, then it'll get that. If the faster Tem on your side uses Turbo, then the slower Tem will move as if it had Turbo for the rest of the turn. Just kind of like Tailwind in Pokemon, if you guys are familiar with that. Next is the plethoric speed boost activates at the start of the turn. Cannot be taken away even if it falls below 70% on that turn. When I first heard about this, I was like, what? That's kind of crazy. But it's very similar to Rested, where the boost happens, right away. And it can't be taken away. Like, same thing as like if a Intimidator Tyrannac gets swapped in, the speed boost has already activated and will not start over. Or it will not get rid of it. But next turn, if you fall below 70%, yeah, you're toast. you don't get the boost. In an endgame scenario where both players have Tems that are going to die to status effects, the faster Tem dies first. So, I mean, if you're running, I'd say this was most common with Doom, but I mean it's also possible with poison and burn, is two Tems both doomed and their doom counters at 1. The turn ends, the faster Tem dies first. Similarly, there's an interaction with Aohai, the fire mental type, where if it has Ignis Fatuus and it already has, and a Tem dies to status effects, the Ignis Fatuus will actually happen at, it'll actually, okay, no, that's kind of its own individual thing, but it'll bring the evasion to the next turn. However, if it already has evasion and the Tem dies first, it would actually wear off and it would not pass to the next turn. So that's way too super specific, so probably ignore that. But this one, the in-game scenario with Doom ticks, the faster Tem dies first. Not saying if you're running a Doom team you should have slow Tems, but just like if you're trying to plan like 10 turns ahead for an end game scenario where you win, try and make sure you're on the slower end. Hyperkinetic Strike is the only technique in the game that takes speed into account in its damage formula. I think Hyperkinetic's super cool. It was overpowered for a little while and got nerfed, so it's not as cool anymore. But it's still very interesting that there is an attack in this game that takes speed into account for its damage formula. I don't know what the formula is. It's been changed and it's just kind of awful, but I think that the wiki or Tem team can help you out. Next, if two Tems on your team have the same speed, the one on the left goes first. Just a general rule of thumb. You have common speed breakpoints like 232, and you have multiple Tems on your team that hit that breakpoint. Well, and they're both on the field, just know that the left one will go first. Not everyone knows that. It's good to know. Left one goes first. Now, similarly, like if you're looking at your opponent from your perspective, and they have two Tems that are the same speed, the one on the right would go first. And speed arrow does not activate if it's just Tems on your own team that are speed tied. It's only if there's Tems on your opponent's team that the speed arrow would activate. Alright, next, speed changes are multiplicative. Example being +2 speed, and using high prio would give you 2.25 speed. Just very simple, but I've seen people ask it before, worth noting. Just for rounding, so speed rounds to the nearest whole number, but speeds rounding in 0.5 round down. Doesn't always come into play, but like the main one is if you're using prio and you have an odd number. So like if you're like 221 and you're using prio, you'll actually round down to 331 instead of rounding up to 332. However, max speed Oshiara, Ukama, Oshiara, Ukama, Gyalis are 330, so you're still outspeeding them by 1, even though you're rounding down by just a little bit. And then blue side always starts the game with the speed arrow. This is something I could see changing in the future, but as of right now, just something to keep in mind, since it's sort of speed relevant, is the speed arrow. Blue side always starts with it. And then here's something I learned much later than probably like a year and a half into my Temtem career, is that the speed arrow only activates if speeds are tied after modifiers. So for an example, if two Tems have 200 speed and one of them clicks normal prio while the other one clicks high prio, the speed arrow will not activate. I didn't know that. I thought that just the speed arrow activated if two Tems of the same speed. So if you can kind of like save the speed arrow by choosing a different prio option than your opponent to use it at a later time. I've seen that done before in really high level play. It's rare enough to speed tie your opponent, but just in case you do, it's a little nice piece of advice for you. Alright, so that's it. There weren't a whole lot of them. I just kind of thought about some niche little things that maybe people want to know or don't know yet, and figured they were kind of speed relevant and I'd throw them in here. But yes, that's going to be it. I'll shrink the page a little bit so you can kind of see all the breakpoints at once, and then I'll just kind of... That's about all I got. I hope this was good for all of you guys, that you enjoyed it. Is useful. I tried to put some time into making this legible, but I don't write scripts. I give myself a couple main points, notes, and then I just speak for the rest of it. So hopefully it was legible enough. If anyone has any additional like general questions, feel free to ask in the comments for sure. And I'll get around to it when I can. I'd be glad to help if I know, but I don't know all the answers, especially to super specific stuff. And I won't be answering any like what speed should this tem have on a bulky team or that. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. It takes a if I start helping people with individual builds, I would end up getting a lot of requests. You can still request me to help build a team through my Twitch channel using channel points, and if you do that, I would be more than happy to help. I want to reward people. I want to reward you guys for watching my stuff. I don't really ask a lot from you guys. I really don't ask for like subs or followers or anything on YouTube or Twitch, but normally, I do appreciate all of you that do sub and like the videos and such. Liking at least gives me an indication that the content I'm putting out is good. And especially for these guide videos, it's nice because it's not like it's super duper fun to make a guide, but I'm more than happy to do it to help you guys with understanding the game. I do like getting new players interested in comp for sure. I'd love to see you guys all on ladder sometime. So that's all I got for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye.